Let's make a simple sourdough bread. Start by milling your wheat berries of choice. I chose a hard red wheat and a Corazon. I set that aside and then added 1 teaspoon of sourdough discard from the fridge, 60 grams of room temperature water, and 60 grams of the flour. Be sure that the flour is cooled before mixing it. Once the ingredients are incorporated, cover it with a dry towel and a rubber band and set it in a warm place. I just leave it on top of the stove. It will take anywhere from 4 to 12 hours to activate. Once the sourdough starter is nice and bubbly, add it to a bowl with 100 grams. Then I added 2 tablespoons of raw honey and 1 tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil. You can alternate those ingredients, or you can just omit the honey and olive oil altogether. I just think it brings a really rich flavor to the bread. I then tear out my weight and I add 300 grams of room temperature water. Give it a good mix, and then you're going to add 500 grams of the fresh milled flour of choice and 15 grams of sea salt, pink Himalayan, whatever salt you choose. I just stay away from table salt. Mix everything together lightly. It's going to create a shaggy dough. Try not to overmix. Be sure to get all of the flour incorporated into the best of your ability without turning it into a batter. We just want to make sure that all the ingredients are able to absorb into the flour. Using fresh milled, this takes a little bit of time and understanding. Cover it with a wet towel, and I just stick it in the oven. Clearly it's not turned on, and I set it for 30 minutes to absorb. I then come back and I make sure that my hand is wet with warm water, and I gently stretch and fold. Now with fresh milled flour, you really don't stretch much. You just kind of fold. I then covered it back up with the damp wet towel and set it again aside for 30 minutes. I came back and repeated the process. Now remember, every time you kind of stretch and fold, you're going to make sure that your hand is wet and that you want the dough to have the feeling of a slight stickiness. You don't want it to be dry. You're going to repeat this process 4 times, cover it, and let it sit overnight in your oven, obviously turned off. In the morning, I took it out of the bowl, I did one more stretch and fold, and then I shaped it slightly and put it into my loaf pan lined with parchment paper. I gave it a good shape, I covered it with a damp wet towel again, and put it back for an hour to rise. Don't stress about the feeling. It does not need to be a dry dough, guys. In fact, it actually can be more wet. I set the oven at 400 and I bake it for 20 minutes and then insert a thermometer. I cover it with aluminum foil, and then I set the timer for 10-minute increments until it reaches 200 degrees. Try not to go over or under on this time. I promise, my bread always comes out great when I follow this one step. I then remove the thermometer and I take the bread out of my pan. I also pull apart the parchment paper so that no condensation builds up, causing the sides of the bread to get soggy. Be sure to let the bread cool completely before slicing in the center, but if you want to try it, cut from the end. Did you know when you ferment sourdough that it predigests the gluten? Did you also know that when you fresh mill your flour, you're keeping the germ in the bran, which has the most nutrition? You can also order a wheat berry that is lower on the gluten index, like a spelt or an einkorn. Be patient, guys. Fresh milled flour bread does take a little bit of troubleshooting, but I promise you can get there. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Enjoy!